Hi guys, welcome to my office. It's Tuesday afternoon, and while I'm up here minding my day job, my little DIY HotVac type setup has been trying to dry out the hull for the last 3.5 to 4 hours. I am so glad I chose a career in IT. For one, it's a lot of fun, and also it allows me to sit here and take care of my day job while I keep an ear on the vacuum pump. I don't feel confident running the system unattended, at least not yet, but there's not a lot to do when the system is up and running. I just check it every hour or so. So working here in the cockpit seems like the perfect solution. If everything goes according to plan, then in this video I'll put down the next section of new core here in the deck, but I think we'll also take a quick peek at some of the common questions from the last video where I introduced the DIY HotVac type system. I've still got a few hours left of wrangling ones and zeros before I regain my freedom for today, so you guys will have to excuse me while I just go ahead and take care of my day job. And just like that, I am done for today, at least with my day job. Now, the real fun begins. At the very top of my to-do list for today is to remove this section of rotten plywood so that the bottom skin of the sandwich construction can dry out. If the previous section I removed way up there is any indication, this stuff should be pretty easy to remove. I'm going to stuff all of the wood I've removed into this plastic bag. That way, when I come back to the boat in a few days, I'll have a really good way of showing you guys how wet this stuff is. An oscillating tool like this one from Bosch does a great job of getting rid of that last little bit of wood that's stuck to the laminate. When it comes to choice of oscillating tool, I'd say this one from Bosch is just as good as the ones from Fine. And in case you're curious, you can use the exact same attachments. Both Bosch and Fine use a system called Starlock. The last thing I'm gonna do today before I head down and turn off the infernal noise of the vacuum pump, which I hope this mic isn't picking up, but we'll see when I start editing this video. Anyway, the last thing I'm gonna do up here on deck is just to trim the old foam core back a bit so that I have enough room to work on when I put in the new plywood core. I'm sure I'm gonna get a bit of flack for choosing to put in a plywood core again, seeing as the old one is rotten, but I think we'll circle back to that topic a little later in the video. Ta-da! In a few days, I'll be able to adhere the new core in place. Now let's get this noisy contraption turned off. And let's turn off the heat. I'll give the mat a chance to cool down before removing it, because right now it's still 80 degrees Celsius. It feels like this is slightly cooler now. Before I remove this mat, I just want to warn you that there might be quite a significant color change hiding behind this, but that's okay. And this is what the laminate looks like after a treatment. I had the mat on there for a little over 6 hours and the temperature was set at 93 degrees Celsius. As you can see, there has been a slight color change, but from what I've been able to read online, that is okay. This area was one of the areas with very high moisture readings. Now the laminate is still way too warm for me to measure the moisture levels, but I'll find out tomorrow if the treatment worked. It's early Thursday morning and I am dying to see what those moisture levels are like, so let's go ahead and take a look. Yeah, most of this area looks perfect. I'm especially pleased with how much the moisture level has dropped in this area over here. Prior to the treatment, the meter was giving a reading of 20, and now it's down to 14. The entire area is just bone dry. It's perfect, with one tiny exception, and that's this area right here, which, as you can hear, is still wet. I've had a closer look using the port light up here above me as a reference. I figured out that this wet area here corresponds to a piece of plywood that's tabbed to the hull as a part of the forward head. So that is something I'm going to have to take a closer look at, but that's going to be another day. Yesterday something important showed up. That's the pile of stuff you're looking at here. It's 60 kilos of epoxy plus hardener, 60 kilos of fiberglass, some peel ply, and I must have ordered something else too, because this box came along with all of the other stuff. There's a set of pumps for the epoxy. Oh, a bunch of silica. Yeah, I think I ordered this just to do a comparison with the stuff from West Systems, just to have a bit of fun. And apparently I ordered 2 of those bags. There's a fin roller, a bunch of product catalogs from the website I ordered from, and last but not least, a pack of biscuits. I'll go ahead and lug all of this up into the cockpit and set up a small area where I can mix up some epoxy, because a little later today I'm going to put in the next bit of core. I've put down some nice thick plastic just because I have had these pumps drip on me, but this is going to be my little epoxy mixing area. I've got 1 box of gloves here near the mixing area and another one up where I'll be working. And there we go. There's only one thing missing from my little mixing area, and that's a bit of 406. 1.5 kilos of the stuff. Like any cooking show with its salt, I did a bit of prep work yesterday in preparation of filming today, and this is the result of that prep work. This is no ordinary piece of plywood. This is, of course, the next piece of core. The core that will go right here. Yesterday I set up a jig in the cockpit to cut the scarf joints to get this to match up with the section I'd already put down. It was a little bit time consuming, and sure, the scarf joints aren't really necessary, but I felt like being a little bit fancy. After I had a good fit, I then proceeded to prep the surface, which meant sanding all of this. But that was a breeze with my new best friend, and that's this dust shroud for my angle grinder. As you might have been able to see, a little bit of dust did escape while I was sanding, but it's nothing compared to using the angle grinder without the dust shroud. And the angle grinder is great for a job like this, where it's a relatively large area, but where the finish doesn't really matter. So this dust shroud is definitely my new best friend. I will include a link in the description for this dust shroud, but please note it is a Makita dust shroud because I've got a Makita grinder. I don't know where you'd go if you've got a different brand of angle grinder, but yeah, check out the link for this. It's pretty dang spiffy. Because I got all of the prep work out of the way yesterday, all I need to do today is just to vacuum this area, and then I can go ahead and mix up some epoxy and pre-coat this plywood. I'm all set up. I've got this little area over here with some plastic underneath it where I can wet out the surface of the plywood with unthickened epoxy. I've got a brush, got some gloves. Over here where I'm going to be putting it down with thickened epoxy, I've got some paper towel ready, a plastic bag for any paper towel I need to discard, some screws for securing it until the epoxy sets, and yeah, I think I'm ready. Thusly pre-coated, I'll go ahead and do the same to the first section. As far as mixing in the 406, I'm just going by eye. I'd say this looks good to me. I'm just gonna mix it a little more just to get rid of the clumps. I've got an even layer of thickened epoxy spread out, so let's go ahead and put down the new core. I'm going to remove these screws before the epoxy fully sets. They are just to make sure that I get a good bond. And as you can see, there's plenty of delicious squeeze out. So far, so good. I've got the core secured to the bottom skin. Now before the epoxy sets up, I'm just gonna mix up some slightly thickened epoxy and pour into the cuts I made here yesterday. And of course, the purpose of those cuts are to make the plywood conform to the shape of the deck. Actually, come to think of it, in a desperate attempt to make less of a mess, I'm gonna try injecting the thickened epoxy in there with this syringe. I've never tried doing this before, and I don't know if it's gonna work, but we'll see. Well, it is working, but a slightly thicker needle would have been awesome. I wouldn't say my experiment with using a syringe to make less of a mess was a complete success because it's pretty messy, but at least I know I got epoxy in everywhere. I'll leave this to set up and I'll just pop down and slap the heating pad on the hull, but then I need to take care of my day job. You might be able to hear the vacuum pump humming away in the background. It's the end of the day. I'm done with my day job and I'm done with my to-do list here aboard Athena for today. As you can see, I've removed the bags of stone and all of the screws, and I think it looks good. I think there's a good bond. I'll leave the plywood alone until tomorrow to allow the epoxy to cure, but then tomorrow I'll come back and remove the next section of foam. I've moved the heating pad to the most forward part of the hull, and if that area is dried out like I think it is, that means the hull is dry from here and forward, well, above this line, but still, tomorrow I can start working on the area down here. So far, my little setup here has been performing flawlessly. Yep, that looks perfect. And that is gonna be it for today. Good morning, guys. It's Saturday morning. Let's start out this day exactly like I've started out all the other days this week. And that is by grabbing some moisture measurements. Yep, that is another successful treatment. So far, I have absolutely nothing bad to say about my little DIY HotVac type setup. Yesterday, I moved the heating mat to this area right here, but I only had a few hours to spend aboard Athena before I had to get going, and I didn't think that was long enough to dry out that section of hull. So before leaving, I switched off the heat and the vacuum pump, but I left the mat in place just to see if the tape would keep it there overnight. And I guess I have my answer. The reason I'm excited about the mat staying in place overnight is because it's not every day I'm gonna be able to put down 8 straight hours here at Athena waiting for a very wet area to dry out. So by knowing that the mat will stay in place even if I turn off the vacuum, I'm able to do that and go out and take care of some other stuff, come back and resume drying out that area. That is gonna make my life a lot easier. If you look closely, you might be able to see 3 little humps on the mat. Those are old holes from some through hulls that I taped off yesterday to get a good vacuum. I hope the hull will dry out so that I can get started on glassing in those holes, but that's gonna be in the next video. Even though I only had a few hours aboard Athena yesterday, I got started on removing some more of the old core, and I discovered something kind of annoying. This area of the deck was reinforced with some plywood. They did that because there's a cleat right around here. And that is a very common solution. The funny thing is, the cleat is way over here and the reinforcement is this area here. And the holes you see here are just from the switches for the windlass. The placement of this cleat is not really the annoying part. That's just a little bit odd why they placed that all the way over there. The annoying part is the fact that this plywood extends in underneath this bit here of the deck. Ideally, at least in my head, I would like to be able to remove all of the old plywood. The thing is, I'm not going to be able to dig out all of this wood here with this lip in place, and I desperately need this lip to join the new deck onto the old deck. If I start digging this out and I've got bits of wood left in there, even if I shove some thickened epoxy in there and some new plywood, I am likely to have some air gaps in there, and that's not gonna be great. Fortunately, thanks to my good luck, the plywood that was here wasn't really in that bad of a shape. Sure, it was a little wet, but it was in a lot better shape than any of the other plywood I've removed from the boat. After a bit of head scratching and a quick texting session with Andy from Boatworks today, I've got a plan. And that plan is to leave that plywood in place and then just try and dry it out. And to do that, I think I'll use my vacuum pump a little later today when it's done drying out that section of hull, that is. If I put that wet piece of plywood under vacuum and I'm able to pull a vacuum of, let's say, 29 inches of mercury, the water that's in the plywood will boil off at around room temperature, or to be more precise, at 24 degrees Celsius or 76 degrees Fahrenheit. So for drying out that plywood, I don't need to apply both heat and vacuum. Just pulling a vacuum should be enough. The reason I'm applying both heat and vacuum to the hull is because I'm trying to get rid of some water and some other compounds. For instance, some glycols. And if we take propylene glycol, that has a boiling point of 188 degrees Celsius, which is a lot higher than water. And that is why I need to apply both heat and vacuum simultaneously to the hull. While I'm waiting for the vacuum pump to do its magic on the hull, I've gone ahead and removed the last bit of foam and cleaned up the bottom skin. There was one feature on this dust shroud I forgot to show you, and that's the fact that this front bit here is removable so that you can easily get into tight places. I've also gone ahead and cut the plywood that's gonna make up for the reinforcement that was there. All I need to do now is to convince these guys to hop on over there. Come on, get going, shoo! I've got the plywood ready, I've got plenty of foam. All I need to do now to be able to put down the new core is to dry out this little piece of plywood. I've set up the vacuum pump right behind the camera, and I've put down some breather cloth, put down some tape, got some plastic ready, and just to be adventurous, I've tried taping this tube instead of using a vacuum connector. Let's see if this will work. I'm sure any experienced vacuum guys that are watching this video are gonna laugh their asses off right about now because this looks like a huge mess.
But I've put in some creases to allow the plastic to conform to the shape of the hull. All that's left to do now is to switch on the pump. As you can note out here, the pump is humming away here in the background. I got a good seal around the plastic and I was able to pull a decent vacuum. I have decided to add a little bit of heat to compensate for it not being a full 30 inches of mercury. Remember that bag I stuffed all of the plywood from the old core into? Well, this is that bag. I tied a knot on it and look at all that condensation. As you can clearly see, that plywood was super wet. Of course, I don't want the same thing to happen to the core I'm putting in now, so I'm gonna be super careful to seal it up. And everywhere where something's penetrating into the core, I'm gonna be using what I call epoxy plugs. I don't know if that's the correct term. I've also heard people refer to it as drill, fill, drill. Yeah, I'm sure most of you guys know what I mean. If you don't, we'll come back to that in a later video. In a desperate attempt to get away from the incessant humming of the dang vacuum pump, I've decided to come here below the boat for a few minutes to give myself a bit of a rest. Before I end this video, I want to be sure to touch on a topic I think a lot of you guys are wondering about. As you've seen, I've decided to replace the old core with a new core that consists partly of plywood, just like the old one. A sealed wooden core is gonna last basically forever. Take the coring in Athena's cabin tub, that's balsa, and it's absolutely pristine because it's sealed. Nobody has been able to tell me without a doubt that it would be okay to use the same fore I'm using for the rest of the deck instead of that strip of plywood that's going down the middle of the deck. Considering that that strip of plywood has been there for 30 years, it's been doing a great job and only failed because the yard didn't seal it up properly, well, I think it's a safe bet just to do that again. Last and also kind of least, there is availability. Sure, I might have been able to find some kind of exotic composite material that mimics the characteristics of plywood that I could use up in the deck and know that it would work, but I was able to pick up this plywood about an hour from here. I got a great deal on this and I didn't have to sit around waiting for some material to show up. I could get started working right away. In short, even though some of you guys are probably gonna disagree with me, I am confident in my choice of material. I am sure I'm gonna have a deck that's gonna be functional for 30 plus years, and overall, I'm happy with this solution. This video is already well past the 20-minute mark, and I've got a stupid amount of stuff on my to-do list, so I better go deal with that stuff and just end this video here. Be sure to tune in next weekend for an update on how drying out that small piece of plywood went. Also next weekend, I hope I'll start patching some of the holes from old through hulls. And last but not least, I also think I'm gonna start building a frame for a new hatch that's gonna go up on the deck. That's gonna be an exciting weekend for sure. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, and as always, feel free to leave a comment down below. See you!